So the next question we'll consider is, where am I going? Or rather, where do I have the potential to go? And again, this is a question that can be answered at different levels. Now, if you look at people, you can see that human beings are doing many different things. There are people who are acting in a completely selfish, self-centered manner. There are people who are acting in a much more selfless manner where they're considering other people, they're considering the whole. And obviously, you can say, what's the difference? What's the difference between these two ways of acting, these two ways of looking at life? And what I have explained in my previous videos is that we human beings, we have the potential to rise to higher levels of consciousness. In other words, there isn't just one level of consciousness. This is one of the big lacks in Western philosophy, Western science, is that we are acting and we're talking as if there's only one level of consciousness possible for a human being. But when you look at people's actions, you can say, how can you explain that some, for example, serial killers or dictators have this complete insensitivity to life, whereas other people are very sensitive to life and have respect for others and wouldn't harm others? How do we explain the difference? And to me, there's only one logical explanation. People are at different levels of consciousness. A serial killer, a dictator, is at the lowest level of consciousness possible on earth. And some of the more altruistic people, selfless people, are at the higher levels of consciousness possible on earth. And most human beings are somewhere in between. So again, where are you going? Well, what I have explained in the previous video is, if you have totally identified with the physical body, if you believe in scientific materialism, you must believe that you're not going anywhere. When your brain dies, boom, lights out. You cease to exist as a conscious being. That's what they say. So the answer is simple, nowhere. Then if you believe in the Christian, then you have different options. You could go to heaven if you've been a good Christian and fulfilled the outer requirements of the Christian religion. Or you could go to hell and suffer for all eternity. And that's a pretty black and white, not a whole lot of options there. But even the Christians, even the Catholic Church, a long time ago, realized that maybe this was a little too drastic. Maybe a lot of people couldn't quite see why God would create us this way. So they have come up with some in-between state. Purgatory, it's called. It's where you supposedly go if you're not ready for hell, if you're not bad enough to go to hell, but you're not good enough to go to heaven either. So then you get a second chance to, I don't know exactly what you're supposed to do in purgatory, but supposedly qualify to go to heaven. Or if you don't, I assume you go the other way. And this raises a lot of questions. And one of the big questions is, what if you're not a Christian? I mean, there's over 7 billion people on the planet, about 1.5 billion Christians, maybe a little more. So what about the rest? 5, 6 million are just going to hell because they're not Christians? And a lot of people, of course, in the modern world, they can't believe in this, so there has to be some nuances. So the obvious answer on an immediate level is reincarnation. You go back into embodiment. After some time, you go back into embodiment. And you have another opportunity to do whatever you want. Have the experiences you want to have, co-create, whether you want to co-create misery and suffering or a better life, but you have another opportunity. And then you can go back into embodiment again. So let's start at an immediate level here. If you're open to this idea of reincarnation, then let's start at the immediate level. A person dies, the physical body dies. The soul vehicle, which I in my previous video explained that it has 3 levels, the emotional, mental, and identity level. So the soul vehicle separates or gets separated from the physical body. The body just decays, whether it's cremated or whether it's left to rot in the ground. It just decays, goes back into matter. Nothing mystical about the physical body. It's just made out of matter, and it deteriorates back into the basic components of matter. But the soul vehicle then separates from the body. But in the vast majority of cases, it doesn't go back into embodiment right away. Most people have an interim period in between embodiments where they, so to speak, have an opportunity to prepare for their next embodiment. Now, this raises the question, where does a particular soul go in between embodiments? And that is a question that doesn't have one answer, because, and this is why it's important to realize there are different levels of consciousness, where the soul goes between embodiments depends on its level of consciousness. And here's another thing that's very important to realize, which I've also explained in my previous videos. That is this. The universe is not a penal colony. There is no punishment. The entire concept of an angry, judgmental God who wants to punish those who doesn't obey him is not real. It's a man-made creation. Okay? The real creator does not want to punish people. Okay? So when a particular soul leaves embodiment, it is not a question of what did that soul do in its last lifetime and what punishment does it deserve based on its actions. That is not a question at all. There is only one question that's relevant, and that is, how can that soul be given the best possible opportunity to raise its consciousness? The only purpose of life is the raising of consciousness. So, you can take a soul like Hitler. Most people would say that was a pretty bad embodiment. Not a whole lot of good there. But there is still no divine being that judges Hitler and says he deserves to be punished for so and so many millions of years in hell. It is simply a matter of what was Hitler's level of consciousness. And in one of my breakthrough videos, which is actually called the 144 levels of human consciousness, I explained that there are 144 levels of consciousness. And they range from the most selfish, the most self-centered at the bottom, to the least self-centered at the top. And so Hitler was obviously very near the bottom there, of completely self-centered, felt fully justified in killing millions and millions of people to prove himself right and to prove himself superior. So you can't get much more self-centered than that. But what does that mean? Well, as explained in some of my How the World Works videos, I talk about the duality consciousness. When we go to these lower levels of consciousness, we go into the illusion that we are separate beings. And we use the duality consciousness to justify whatever we want to do. And in the duality consciousness, there are always two polarities, good and evil, right and wrong. So what you saw with Hitler was, he defined a certain view of this is right. I am right because of this. And he was fully convinced that he was right, that it was okay to eradicate the Jews because they were in the way of this vision of a better world that he had created in his own mind. So what I'm saying is that when you go to the lower levels of consciousness, you're talking about beings here who have very closed minds, because their minds are very, very fixated on this very dualistic argument. I am right because this is the truth and this is the lie. This is good, this is evil, and I am good. So Hitler was convinced that he was good. And what also happens is that when people go into that lower state of consciousness, their minds are very, very closed. And why are they closed? Because it becomes very, very important for them to be right. And this means what? It means if they were proven wrong, it would be absolutely devastating for them. It would be completely devastating for them. if they were proven wrong. So what I'm trying to show here is that when such a being goes out of embodiment, it is very, very close to looking at its last lifetime from a neutral perspective. Even from the perspective that most people would have on a live stream like Hitler, very close to looking at it from that perspective. And what does that mean? Well, it means that, as I've explained, in a realm above ours, the ascended realm, the spiritual realm, there are ascended masters. And the ascended masters have one task, or at least they have several tasks, but one of their basic tasks is to help us grow, those of us who are in embodiment. The task of the ascended masters is to help us grow in consciousness, raise our consciousness. So when a live stream leaves embodiment, there are ascended masters that are assigned to look at that live stream, but their view is not, does that live stream deserve punishment? Their view is only, how can we help that live stream grow? But the more closed that a live stream is to looking at itself, evaluating its last embodiment, the less options the ascended masters have for helping that being. And that means that there are some live streams that are such a low level that the ascended master can't actually help them because they can't communicate with them. They are not open to dealing with any beings. And so what happens is that at these lower levels of consciousness, when a person leaves embodiment, the soul of that person simply gravitates to a particular level, a particular energetic level that is beyond the physical level. And this is where it becomes important to consider what I've said, that there are 4 levels of the material universe. There's the physical level, there's the emotional level, the mental, and the identity level. And these are simply levels of energy, levels of vibration. So they have different dimensions. You could talk about parallel universes in the sense that these exist parallel to the physical world. We don't see them with our physical senses, but throughout the ages, many, many people have had visions of these worlds beyond the physical. A famous writer called Dante had a vision of the 9 circles of hell, for example. And there's actually a reality to this, in the sense that in the emotional realm, there are certain levels that have a resemblance to the visions of hell that people have had. There are various levels of these. And these levels were not created by God. They are not inevitable. They don't have to exist. They were created by human beings over a period of time. And they were created by beings in this very low level of consciousness. And the purpose of these levels is really that a live stream that has been in a very low self-centered state of consciousness can go there in between embodiments. And what happens to this live stream is that it will now experience what it did to others in its last lifetime. In other words, there are beings there, a number of beings who are completely selfless. I mean, completely self-centered, completely selfish. And they will do to each other what they did to people in their last lifetime. So, you know, a live stream like Hitler will experience on its own mind, in its own mind, what it did to others. And the same with other selfish beings. And this is not really a punishment, even though it may seem like it. It's just that when a live stream is so closed-minded, the Ascended Master can't help it. They can't show them a way out of their state of mind. So the purpose of these levels really is to have the live stream have that very difficult experience until the live streams opens itself up to say, I've had enough of this. Is there more to life than this? And then comes the crucial thing. The live stream needs to open it up to say, is there something I could do to get out of this hell? Could I change myself? And am I willing to change myself? And when a live stream reaches that point, then the Ascended Masters can help it. It can either rise to a higher level of this emotional realm, or it can go back into embodiment and have an opportunity to raise its consciousness that way. So this is one explanation of where do I go. Most people, of course, are not at these lower levels of consciousness. They're not completely self-centered. So many people in between embodiments, they go to other levels. There are higher levels of the emotional realm, for example, for people who are very focused on their emotions. But many people also go to the mental realm, where they receive instructions and help to raise their consciousness and prepare for their next lifetime. We can basically say that there are two levels we are talking about here. I have explained in some of my other videos, there are 144 levels of consciousness, but one of the important points on it is the 48th level. Because from the 48th level to the lowest level, we have people who have gone into this illusion that they are separate beings. And this means you become susceptible to one of the basic illusions of the physical world. And that illusion is, I can do something to you without affecting myself, because we are separate beings. And this, of course, is based on people's experiences. You can kill somebody else's physical body, but your body isn't struck by lightning and dies at the same time. So if society doesn't put you in jail, you have seemingly gotten away with murder. Of course, since everything is connected and everything is energy, you don't get away with murder. You create karma, and this will affect you in a coming life, and so forth and so on. But what I'm saying is that below the 48th level, a being is in what I call the school of hard knocks. Because the being has now gone on to this state of being closed-minded, and it isn't open to learning. It isn't open to learning from other people. You try and go to a person like Hitler and try to explain to him why what he's doing is wrong, and you're not going to get very far, because they're not open to listening to you. But at the same time, our spiritual teachers are the Ascended Masters in a higher realm. And these people below the 48th level, they're not open to listening to the Ascended Masters, because they think they know best. They think they can define, as I explain in some of my How the World Works videos, they think they can define how the universe is supposed to work. And the only way they can overcome that illusion is basically by hitting their head against a concrete wall enough times. The school of hard knocks gives you harder and harder knocks until you start questioning, maybe the world doesn't work the way I think it works. How does the world work? And then you become open to learning. Then you become open to instructions from the Ascended Masters. So what I'm saying with all of this is, a large percentage of people are below the 48th level of consciousness. But a larger percentage is actually above the 48th level of consciousness. And when you are above, you are open to raising your consciousness. You're open to making progress. You're open to going forward. And this means that now in embodiment, it's not just a matter of, as I said, at the lower levels where you just have to experience. You're put in a level with people at your same level of consciousness, so you can basically continue to give each other the hard knocks. But when you go above the 48th level, you're open to doing something constructive on Earth. So what happens at that level is that you are preparing for what you want to accomplish, what positive contribution you want to make in your next lifetime. So it can be a matter of studying a particular skill, for example. You will see that there are some people who, from very early childhood, they know what they want to do in life. I want to become an engineer, or I want to become a writer. I want to do this, I want to do that. People can have this from early childhood, a desire for it. And then when they start going to school and studying, they have an ability. It's almost like they are born with a certain ability in this particular field. And the reason for this is that they have prepared themselves before they came into this embodiment, but they might actually have developed that skill over many previous lifetimes. many scientists, many musicians, many people who have unusual abilities, it's because over several lifetimes and in between lifetimes, they developed those abilities, that knowledge. So they come in, first of all, having a clear vision where they want to go, but also a more than normal ability to go there and to do it. So this is what happens when you are above the 48th level. You are actually in between embodiments. You are making a plan, a life plan, what you want to do in your next lifetime. But that life plan is not just a matter of outer skills and what you want to do in the physical. It's also a matter of the growth you want to go through in consciousness. How much do you want to raise your consciousness? Many people who are what we might call spiritual people, who are open to a spiritual path where you raise your consciousness consciously, we have in between embodiments, we created a life plan that says, okay, I look back at my life stream, I look back at these past embodiments I've had, I see what traumas I experienced in past lives, I see I have a particular psychological trauma, psychological pattern, and I want to overcome it in this lifetime. So sometimes we deliberately choose to go into a very difficult childhood, a very difficult physical situation, because it, so to speak, forces us to deal with that psychological issue. I've explained that in more depth in many of my other videos. All I'm trying to say here is that when you're below the 48th level of consciousness, it's the school of hard knocks. When you leave embodiment, you go into a level with other beings who are at the same level of consciousness. You're pushing against each other, you're giving each other the hard knocks, whereby you might come to see that I've had enough of this, and I'm willing to change myself to get out of this. And then when you are above the 48th level, you have a positive approach to life, because now you're open to instructions, you're open to raising your consciousness, you're open to doing something positive on earth, so you're making a life plan for your next lifetime. Now, when you go above the 48th level, you have the opportunity to become more and more conscious of the possibility that you can raise your consciousness. And this means that there can come a point where you become open to what traditionally has been called the spiritual path or the mystical path. And this is something that when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, it was virtually unknown in these the Western world. Because it wasn't preached by Christianity, of course. Christianity suppressed all knowledge of a spiritual path, and the Catholic Church started doing this at its inception, and for 1700 years it's been suppressing all knowledge of a mystical or spiritual path. There's only the Christian religion, which is either or. You're either a good Christian, according to their definition, or you go to hell. So you don't need a path, because you are saved by forces outside yourself. This is what they say. Then, of course, the other aspect is scientific materialism, which says there is no path because your consciousness is a product of the brain, and you disappear when the brain dies. So there are these two elements in society that have denied that there's any path we can walk. But if you look at it historically, throughout the ages, there's always been this mystical or spiritual path. And the spiritual path is really very simple. It says, you are not a product of circumstances beyond yourself. And your salvation or your growth is not dependent on an external savior. It's dependent on your level of consciousness. You have the potential to take command over your level of consciousness, whereby you consciously, systematically, deliberately raise your consciousness. And I touched upon how you do this. You come to see these separate selves. You go through the process of letting them die. And basically, for each level of consciousness, from the 48th level up, there's one of these separate selves that is based on a particular illusion. And you can walk that path of coming to see illusion after illusion, letting them go, and you rise higher. And I explained this in some of my How the World Works videos, how you can rise from the 48th level to the 96th level, where you're basically pulling yourself above the mass consciousness, the collective consciousness, which wants to pull you into conformity with how life is seen in your particular culture, or even on the planet as a whole. So at the 96th level, you reach another turning point where now you go into these, what I call the levels of higher awareness, or the level of personal Christhood, where you start really connecting with your higher self. You start really becoming one with your higher self, and you stop identifying yourself with your emotional, mental, and identity minds, with the outer personality. You realize it's just a vehicle. And so you can then continue to raise your consciousness further and further until you reach the highest level, which is the 144th level. Now, up until you reach this 144th level, you will still reincarnate in between embodiments. But the thing is, you have the opportunity to, as you raise your consciousness, you become better and better at defining the circumstances for your next embodiment. So you can define better and better circumstances that facilitate your continued growth. But at the 144th level, you face a specific choice. And that choice is, you can now permanently let go of your identification with the outer mind, the identity, mental and emotional mind, and the physical body. And you can ascend. You can ascend by reuniting with your higher self. And then you, or your higher self, you become an ascended master, an ascended being. And so from that point on, you are a permanent being. You are an immortal being. Up until then, you could theoretically go against the upward movement of the entire world, and you could eventually come to a point where you don't exist anymore. At least the conscious self. But when you ascend, you become a permanent being. And as a permanent being, you have options that are beyond what we can even imagine when we're an embodiment on a planet like Earth. There are just so many more options. You could go to other planets that are natural planets, where they don't have the warfare and the negativity and the selfishness you find on Earth. But you could also ascend to the spiritual realm and become an ascended master, where you can now you can start serving to help other unascended beings, or to help unascended beings raise their consciousness. But you can also go on and discover what is there in the ascended realm and raise your consciousness further and further. And you can engage in a process that takes you up. As I've explained in my How the World Works videos, we are in a particular sphere that is the 7th in a line of spheres that go back to the Creator. So there are many levels of this 7th sphere that you can explore, and you can raise your consciousness. But you can come to a point where you can now ascend from the 7th sphere. Then you go to the 6th sphere. You work your way up through the layers of consciousness there, and you can continue doing that until you reach the level of the Creator consciousness, the same level of consciousness as our Creator had when that Creator started creating our world of form. So where are you going? Well, potentially you are a creator in the making if you choose to walk that path. But you can also go in other directions and explore other things, and you can take a very, very long time to do this. So there are many, many options that open up. What we might say is that it's difficult to grasp here on Earth, because what we experience on Earth is that there are so few options open to us. You are born in a certain lifetime based on the society and the family you were born in. There are certain options that seem possible and many that seem impossible. But once you ascend, it's like there are no limitations to where you can go. It's just a matter of your willingness to raise your consciousness. And so that is a whole different world, a whole different array of possibilities and opportunities that open up after you ascend. And until then, you can continue to raise your consciousness from the 48th to the 144th level. And this will also be an experience of more and more opportunities open up for you. Because it's very simple. The opportunities that open up to you, or that are open to you right now, depend on your level of consciousness. It's a matter of what can you see, what opportunities do you see with your current level of consciousness, and what opportunities do you see as being realistic, attainable. So I've used this image before of an observation tower in a forest. it has a staircase you are walking up, and the staircase corresponds to the 144 levels of consciousness. But at the bottom level of the staircase, you don't see very much because there's trees all around you. But as you go higher and higher, you come to a point where you can see above the treetops, and therefore you can see more and more. So as you go, especially as you approach this 96th level of consciousness, suddenly you can see more opportunities for what a human being, an embodiment on earth can do, and you become able to see them as realistic. You realize you could actually attain this. And this is what has happened to many people who have been in embodiment for a long time on earth. They have gradually raised their consciousness. They've come to see, yes, this is possible. And you can see many examples of people who grew up in very limited, very difficult circumstances. But they had a goal, they had a vision. I can attain more than this. I have to get out of here. I have to go somewhere else and achieve something because I can do better than this. I can do better than my parents and the people around me could see. And this is because they have attained this level of consciousness in past lifetimes. They created a life plan in between embodiments, and now they come in with that life plan, with a sense of that life plan. And many spiritual people, many of the people who will be open to this talk, you have a life plan, and it's really a matter of connecting to it. And that's really what I'm talking about in my breakthrough videos, how you can help connect to that and discover what is your life plan and how you can make the best possible use of the opportunity that the rest of this lifetime really is. And so with this, I hope I've given you some sense of where you might be going in the near term, but also in the long term. And I hope it's been useful to you.